If you want a steamship, get on a steamship. It's big and it's fancy and it's comfy. We're a motherfucking speedboat. And if you want to get on, get wet and get fast, that's how we're going to go, because the environment we're in, it is sink or be drowned.
Welcome back to a brand new series of 40-Minute Mentor, your pocket-sized career mentor on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders. From purpose-led entrepreneurs to world-class investors and Olympic champions, you'll learn firsthand from today's successful leaders on what it takes to be brilliant, all in just 40 minutes. Today, we're joined by Deirdre O'Neill, co-founder and chief commercial and legal officer at women's health startup Hertility Health. Prior to Deirdre's move into the startup world, she worked as a dual qualified lawyer in England and Ireland for both corporate law firms and in venture capital law. Since 2019, Deirdre, together with her twin sister and co-founder Dr. Helen O'Neill and co-founder and COO Dr. Natalie Getreu, have been shaping the future of reproductive healthcare by pioneering unique diagnostic testing. Deirdre and the team at Hertility are doing such important work, so I can't wait to get a behind-the-scenes look into what they've been building so far and their ambitious plans for the future. Deirdre, a big welcome to 40-Minute Mentor. It's a real pleasure to have you with us on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. And what we always like to do on the podcast is ask a few quick-fire questions to warm you up and for our listeners to get to know you a bit better. So, if you don't mind, please can you finish the following sentences after me? Question 1. The most memorable day in my career was when?
I think probably going out and doing our billboards. Am I supposed to say one word here or a whole sentence?
Yeah, no, go for it.
With the first billboard campaign that we launched, because I write all of the sort of the copy relating to the campaigns that we did, they're quite memorable. So for me, standing in King's Cross Station with Helen, seeing Give Yourself a Standing Ovulation on one screen and you're not overreacting on another. Those were the real standout moments for me, because this is such an amazing place in central London to see the brand come to life. I think that really stands out for me. I also had my baby strapped to the front of me, so it felt like we did everything together in thick and thin.
Oh, amazing. Oh, I love that. And my daughter's 8. And they don't really realize it now, how important a role they play in a way to entrepreneur stories and founder life. They're often involved, even if they don't even, not even conscious of it.
Yeah, mine contribute to the bags under my eyes.
Yeah, fair play. No, I love that. And I must say that I love that campaign. I was reading a bit about it and very powerful, but also humorous. And you were introduced to me as one of the funniest people that Tom knows, who kindly made the intro. So I'm not surprised that you're behind. Now I know that it makes sense you're behind those catchy taglines. Second question: one word others would use to describe me is?
I'm going to say tough, but it's probably ball breaker.
Okay, nice.
When we first started out, I was the CBB, not the chief commercial officer, not anything. It was the chief ball breaker. I think there's definitely a role for that in a startup. So yeah, I'll go with tough rather than ball breaker, because ball breaker is 2 words and I'd prefer to say labia breaker.
No, I get it. And I think that's very true. Was that internally, externally, in all ways?
I think in all ways. I think there's definitely a soft side, but you have to be tough in this environment, and you have to definitely be tough in having a startup. That's not to say it's the only facet of my personality, but for the purposes of a one-word answer, sure.
No, I love it. Thank you. My biggest failure to date is?
Not raising Series A before the whole world fell to pieces.
Yes.
It's not my failing, but I take it as being my failing. The timing, we didn't need to at the time I had just had my second child, so it wasn't really feasible, but I still beat myself up for not going out when the highs were at their highest, and then doing, fundraising at a time where all funds locked their wallets and said, no, not now. So I think that's probably my biggest failing, if you could call it that.
Yeah, it's not really a failing on your part, but yeah, I totally understand it, and it's sadly, yeah, you're not the first person to say that to me in the last 12 months. But I do get the sense that things are picking up in that respect, and that there is capital out there. So fingers crossed, we won't put off any aspiring or early stage founder that's raising at the moment. There is hope. There is definitely hope. But yeah, I totally understand that. On the contrary to that, I measure success by.
I measure success by the number of lives that we see changed for the better. We get constant streams of encouragement, obviously constant streams of negativity from this world. Is very binary in terms of a comment section. But one of the things that sticks out the most for me was someone saying, "Hertility are the reason I'm holding my 10-month daughter." And that to me is the biggest thing, because it's actually an impact on someone's lives. It's about not just changing lives, but helping people to create lives. And that's my measure of real success. We were in a number of in-person events we've gone to. We've been approached by women saying, "Hertility has literally changed my life. I got a diagnosis and it has honestly changed my life for the better." And that's to me the only real measure of success.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And not many people can say that thing. So yeah, it's such an amazing mission. Thank you for sharing. And we're going to be diving in a lot more to the story in a minute. So thank you. And finally, if there was one thing I could change about entrepreneurship, it would be...
I think it's just relentlessness. There's nothing is ever enough. And it feels like a process of torture sometimes, because no matter how hard you try and how much you work and how many evenings, weekends that you sacrifice, you're still only at the very bottom of the hill. But there's nothing that will change that. I think the reality is instead of changing entrepreneurship, you have to change the way you approach entrepreneurship. And I think that you have to enjoy that. Like, there's a part of you that has to love being a workaholic. Otherwise, it's not for you.
Yeah, it's really important and great advice. I think anyone that's going through this journey at the moment will relate to what you just said. And actually, I think the highs become less high of a high and the lows become less of a low, like the better. And that's something that took me a few years to kind of get used to. I was a constant roller coaster of emotions, and now I'm a bit more on an even keel.
It's like being bipolar.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, Deirdre, I'm already very excited about this conversation just from those initial questions, and I can't wait to chat about Hertility. But we're going to start at the very beginning. I always think it's important to kind of get a sense of our guests' upbringing and early life and how that kind of shaped the person and leader you are today. So I think if I'm right in saying you grew up in Ireland, would love to hear a bit more about your foundational years, if you don't mind.
Sure. I am from Cork in the south of Ireland, and I was there until I went to university there. I did law in Cork, and I then I only came to London to do a master's, and I honestly thought that I would come for 1 year and then go back home to Ireland. And it shocks me to this day that I'm in London now nearly 16 years. But I think inherently part of my upbringing, anyone will tell you I'm the most Irish person there is. I'm very, very proud of where I come from, and I'm very, very proud of being Irish and being an Irish entrepreneur. I think there's a huge level of that in Ireland. I have a big family, so I'm one of 6 children. So my mum had my 4 brothers and then twin girls. So I've loved being part of a big family.
What a result.
Yeah. I think about it with my children now. I think, God, the first one, you're so precious and cautious about every single thing. And the second one, it wanes off. And I think, God, what about number 6? Like, how much do you think, like, at number 6, you're like, they're fine, they're grand.
It's probably why you're entrepreneurs, though, self-sufficient.
It's why I'm tough. Having 4 older brothers and being the youngest of 6 definitely contributes to your levels of being tough. And I think that has had a big impact. I loved being sort of part of a big family, always kind of a view that family was the biggest thing, the most important thing. And I am very close to all of my family still. I think it has a big impact on how you operate generally. And so and my parents are very instrumental as well. My dad is a consultant anaesthetist, and my mom was a speech pathologist, and then she had 6 children. So we've kind of grown up in a very medically fluent family. I think everyone talked about anatomy and injuries and illnesses and things very fluently and openly, because the stories from the hospital would come home with Dad. And I think that's possibly contributes as well to my interest in this.
Makes sense. All makes sense now. That's really interesting to know. And you ultimately chose the path of law, which is interesting given the medical background. So I would love to know why, and how was that part of your career in terms of the skills you learned, particularly with a lens of how that's helped you in your kind of entrepreneurial life?
So I think growing up in Ireland, the education is a really important facet. And there's a really highly competitive educational element in terms of going to the type of university and the points that you need to obtain. In Ireland, you go to your closest university. That's the goal. You don't aim to go far away because it means then you didn't get the points to go to your closest university. It's in England, it's completely different. But it was, if I wasn't going to be a doctor, I was going to be a lawyer. And that's probably because there was this sort of upper echelon of careers that you were either going to be a doctor or a lawyer, or for me, that was it. And I think that when I wasn't going to be a doctor, I think my dad very much, the glamorized side of medicine was removed by my father because he was on call all the time. And he just said, this isn't a career for anyone like this. If, you'd be wasted in medicine. And I think that law was the obvious next calling. And I think it really suited my personality. I really enjoyed studying law. I did a master's in medical law because obviously if I couldn't be a doctor, I could defend doctors. And so my master's was in King's College in London. And again, it was actually more scientifically swayed towards the global regulation of biosciences with particular regard to embryo research. So it's funny that everything still relates to everything we're doing at Hertility. And it's, I strayed away by doing corporate, but I also still had that at the kind of core of my original training. I went to, after my master's, I actually did clinical negligence for a few years, and that's actually soul destroying. And then I switched to corporate law and did kind of broad corporate M&A, and then kind of honed down on venture capital in Cooley, which is where I met Tom McGinn, which is why I'm here. And so I think of the kind of the legal skills that you obtain, they're absolutely core to everything you do. Sometimes people ask, do you miss being a lawyer? And my instant response is that I'm more a lawyer now than I ever was, because the skills that I now need to impart they're corporate, they're commercial, they're employment law, it's data protection, it's IP, it's every single facet, regulations, it's every facet of the law that you could imagine set across every aspect of the business. So it's part of everything I'm doing. And I think all of the training that I've had to date has been very helpful, particularly, I guess, with venture capital and, negotiating contracts and, negotiating raises. I think that it's been very helpful.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And actually, as somebody that hates contracts and all of that side of as a solo founder, I would love nothing more than to have had a co-founder that was a lawyer and that brings that rigor and that skill set that you need to be successful in law. I think is so underrated, and actually increasingly a lot of the founders that come on this podcast have been lawyers, and I'm really seeing that trend. So it's really cool. I guess you ventured out, but still are very much a lawyer in terms of with the way you use it at Hertility. But in 2019, you joined forces with your twin sister Helen and other co-founder Natalie to start Hertility. So I'm sure our audience would absolutely love to hear the origin story of the business and ultimately why the three of you decided to start the business when you did.
It's funny because when we started, we were all still full-time working in our jobs, and it's something that I remember thinking, if I do this, it has to be the best thing I do. It has to be, there's no going back from this and maybe I'll dabble in. And there's a part of me that knows that Helen, as a molecular geneticist and researcher, she loves science, loves research. That is her passion. That is her core. And there is very much a time of this where I feel like she thought that if it didn't work out, it was fine because her research was her true love. In my mind, when I left Cooley, I knew without a shadow of a doubt, I had to make this the best thing I've ever done. There was no utterance or even suggestion in my mind that this would be anything other than a success. And I think that we all came from it from such different angles. I think the calling in terms of the need, so why did we start Hertility? Why was this needed? Is very different for each of us. So, for me working in a law firm, being able to check in, everyone's on a ladder. Everyone's kind of trying to climb the greasy corporate ladder, as someone once described it to me. And I think that if you're very driven and career is something that you want to think about, you want to be able to assess, okay, what are my family planning options? Do I have the time? All the people talk about is the ticking biological clock, and it is ticking. But nowadays we mute the sound of it. We just say, okay, not for now. This is not what I'm thinking about right now. And I think that for me, just not being able to just assess how much time I had, whether I kind of go the next step or at a pivotal point in terms of, that's the time of life I wanted to do it. It's a really big feature. And I think that the current provision within private medical insurance is that to say if there's a problem and you have symptoms, maybe you might deal with it. But currently, women's health isn't dealt with in private medical insurance. So to me, it defied logic that I might have access to private medical insurance and yet no access to just checking in. And similarly, the idea that a firm would pay for someone to have egg freezing or IVF, but not just check in, seemed to me to be negligent in a way. Helen is a molecular geneticist. She's my twin sister. She's a molecular geneticist, and she did a PhD in prenatal genetics and fetal medicine. And she was lecturing. She's a tenured lecturer in UCL, but she was lecturing masters and medical students on reproductive health and age-related fertility decline, and talking about this graph and being at the pinnacle point of that free fall in the graph, saying, I have no answers about this. I can't check in. And when people would ask her in real time, like, what do I do about this? How do I check in? She had access to endocrinologists, fertility experts, reproductive health, gynecologists, everyone, and yet didn't have answers to just check in on her own body. And I think the kind of light bulb moment for her was she saw a test tube of someone who was going through IVF and it had the same date of birth as her. And the realization of, I'm nowhere near this point in my life, and yet someone is already going through IVF. And Natalie is an ovarian biologist. So Natalie was assessing ways to preserve people's fertility when they're going through cancer. So fertility preservation through cancer was something that we provided for in medicine, but fertility preservation just for every woman was not. And so I think all of us had slight what the hell moments relating to why it is that no matter what your avenue or your life point, you can't just check in. And I guess then that's where the kind of the view that we needed to have this came from.
Love it. What a cool story. I guess it's probably the time to give our listeners the elevator pitch for what the business is today and how it works for anyone that might be a potential customer or be interested in using it.
Well, Hertility it's a revolutionary approach. It's a revolutionary approach to women's health, to accessible, affordable, personalized medicine across reproductive health. And we have hand-selected global experts in fertility and reproductive health and endocrinology and menopause to provide next generation health screening, testing, consultations on demand with experts, and pathways to care for any eventuality. So we're very proud to have created a new standard of care in science and in medicine in women's health. And we've really sought to democratize the fertility market by creating comprehensive but fast and affordable diagnostic care. So reducing diagnosis times for some conditions from 8 years to 8 days.
That's amazing. That is so cool. And I know you've had a lot of success and traction since you started, including getting VC funding, running a successful crowdfunding campaign, the incredible billboards you mentioned, so many great milestones. I guess building a startup has those brilliant highs, but also a number of challenges, and particularly in those early days when you're trying to build a business like this in a heavily regulated space, I'd imagine there were plenty of blockers or things that got in the way. So do you mind telling us a bit about what those early days were like? How did you find getting that traction, and what were some of the biggest pain points for you in those early years?
Regulations is definitely a massive one. I think but it's the most important. And I think before we even ever thought to launch a product, we knew that we had to be a trusted provider of care. And in order to provide a level of care in medicine and certainly in diagnostic care, you have to be regulated. Regulations are very difficult to obtain in one country, but then when Brexit happened, we had to obviously then do it for the UK as well as Europe. We also started when in the midst of us kind of being a very early stage company, COVID struck, and so that there were global shortages in lab availability, in lancets, in the things that we needed in order to test blood. We were also just deprioritized. It was all people wanted to check in on was COVID rather than on anything else. And I think that we've seen, I always joke about the black swans. They used to frighten me, and now they're like my pets. There's so many black swans that I'm like, come on, my pretty, join the flock. There's just constant things that happen to us. And I think that it's difficult to try and regulate in a space that is it's kind of uncharted territory in a way. There's a lot of things that happened over the course of the last few years, both from a venture perspective, but also from a health perspective and the fallout from COVID. It's been filled with challenges, but I often think if you could have survived the last 3 years, you can survive anything.
Yeah, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, no doubt about it. I guess women's health and reproductive health are sadly still topics that aren't researched enough, talked about enough. They are, it's one of the sort of great travesties, really. So how have you found building momentum or trying to get momentum around topics that are still seen by many as a taboo topic?
I think normalising conversations about, firstly, visualising them. So part of our branding is that we bring in real skin, real bodies, reproductive anatomy. We took out the textbooks. We wanted to showcase what a uterus looks like, what fallopian tubes look like, and bring in that language. So we call that, we've got a section on our website called Hermenology, which is terminology for her. And again, just trying to reinforce the language around our reproductive anatomy and our health generally, and normalize conversations about it, and showing people that what might be to them quite a private thing actually, or an embarrassing thing, actually happens to a huge proportion of women, and to feel that they aren't alone. I think trying to bring these conversations to the fore, both in the workplace, sort of in the public, is part of the mission that we have, to say there's no way that our health should be taboo. I mean, men's health isn't taboo, and women's health is impacted. So there's so much more of a profound impact when women's health isn't right. We're seeing it with falling birth outcomes, falling fertility rates. And I think that is something to be said for just speaking out about that. And that's been infused in all of our narrative, all of our campaigns. Even when we say, that we did, one of the billboards was what the fallopian, that the healthcare shouldn't be under prioritized. There's less than 2% of public funding goes into women's health. We need to call bullshit on that, to say, hang on, we're 52% of the planet and our health matters.
100%. And it really rings true. Very close family member of mine, great female friends of mine. I didn't realize they'd been going through fertility challenges, that there were health things that they didn't talk about, because it's not something that's talked about openly enough. And you realize there's a lot of people that that are going through very similar problems. And I really think companies like Hertility are doing a great job to demystify some of this stuff, to make it okay to discuss, because actually a lot of these people just need support from their friends and family, but feel that they can't because no one talks about it. I think it's really, really important, and it's amazing to see that conversation moving in the right direction. Although I'm sure there is still a lot of work to be done. I wanted to touch upon fundraising. It's a world you know well from your time as a lawyer, and then now as a founder of a business that's seen better times and challenging times. You've raised from the likes of Local Globe, well-known angel investors, through crowdfunding. So we'd love to get your thoughts on your fundraising experience and how you've leveraged different types of funding to such success.
One of the most interesting things I read this year was about the type of fundraising that people have been doing. So there's a form of kind of closing. Normally you'd close a deal and that would be it. Everyone signs a document and the round is closed. This year, 78% of deals have remained open, meaning that people are essentially continuing to raise. They're not closing the round. They're continuing to raise wherever and however they can. And I actually think that that's an amazing asset to have as a company, because it allows you to be a little bit more flexible in terms of how you're approaching people. And it's not this monumental thing that needs to happen and then needs to close, and then you think about it in a year's time. So that's largely what we've done over the last year. So we did our seed raise with Local Globe and with Venrex. That honestly is one of the moments that really sticks out to me, negotiating that deal. It was the kind of the back and forth of speaking with all these different VCs. And that was the kind of the heyday, I guess, where everyone wanted in. And it was an amazing kind of position of power to be in, which is completely now the reverse the other way. I mean, that's not to say the VCs have the power. I don't think anyone does. I think everyone's kind of at the whim of what the economy's doing. But we've kind of done everything. So we did that big raise to begin with. We wanted to do a Series A when the whole world fell apart. We called it then a Series Nay. So we decided we would go with a community round. And the reason why crowdfunding has actually got a bit of a bad rap, depending on who you talk to. And I've talked to quite a lot of people who say, kind of an unsophisticated thing to do for a company of your scale, growth. Like, why would you crowdfund? And I had viewed it in a different way because I had seen, these huge tech giants like Monzo and Revolut doing these crowdfundings. And I had worked on the Monzo deal when I was at Cooley, and I thought, well, if they've carved out this proportion of their round, even though they're raising multiple millions, they've carved out a part of their round for crowdfunding because they value customers. They value having brand ambassadors investing in their success. They're not just doing it because they want to make money. They're doing it because they believe in this company and they believe in the success of that. And then people will recommend it to other people, and you suddenly have not just one investor talking about something on their portfolio, but in our case, we had 1,600 investors who were then talking about it in their kitchens, their living rooms, in the pub, to their friends. And there's a huge strength in me in that ambassador investor, because you've got that strength without even having to reach them as a personal customer, because a lot of them weren't actually customers. They just believed in what we were doing. So we did our crowdfunding campaign was deliberately tongue-in-cheek. So we did a campaign saying invest in Clitcoin over Bitcoin. And we wanted people to feel uncomfortable with that fact, because people would invest in the blockchain over biology, even though they knew nothing about blockchain. And there was so much money spent on cryptocurrencies instead of things that would fundamentally change lives. So we were quite tongue-in-cheek about our campaign on that, and it was very successful. And I think that we then rolled that onto additional investors, one institutional investor from the States, and a number of angels that we've had. And it's been, to be honest, it's been a great thing for us to do, because we have me to do all the paperwork and just constantly deal with it. Other companies mightn't be as confident in rolling their own raises constantly.
Yeah. Well, again, that legal background coming in handy. It's really good to hear. And I think it's important for the early stage founders listening, the aspiring founders listening, to know that there are these different avenues. I mean, VC funding is sort of always seen as the holy grail, but the reality is the vast majority of businesses don't actually raise from VC, and there are other methods. And I also agree, I've seen it for a number of our clients, how powerful crowdfunding has been in terms of creating those advocates and brand ambassadors, as you say. So hopefully that will inspire others to at least explore the alternatives.
I will caveat it is hard work. So it was good for a reason, but it is not something to delve into lightly. If I actually could change my first answer on what do I regret, it isn't not raising Series A before the whole fallout. It's just, I wish we didn't bother with raising from VCs at all. I wish we had just focused on grants consistently, because we're so grant eligible that would have been the major win for us, is getting grant funding. So I think if you're an entrepreneur and you can think about ways to raise money, seek out and fully explore grants before you do any venture funding route.
Great advice. Yeah. And particularly in this climate, I think if you can extend your runway as long as possible without external investors, it's a really good thing, and it puts you in a stronger position. I listened to a talk this morning where somebody that exited a business for hundreds of millions, but his big regret was, we raised too much external capital too early, and we didn't actually have a fully fledged business model. And, it put such pressure on him and his founding team that it almost became too much. Now, thankfully, they got through that, but I've seen it go the other way.
There's so many stories like that, so it could go either way.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be remiss of me not to ask you, you're a very successful female founder, but it is, the stats are there. It is much harder for you to raise than it is for male founders. I hope that's changing. I feel like it is slowly, but probably not fast enough. So I just wanted to get your advice for any other female founders listening to this that might be struggling with fundraising at the moment. Is there any tips or pointers or just words of encouragement you would leave them with?
I think that it is not only harder as a woman because you're a woman and you need to prove yourself 10 times more than you do as a man, but it's harder because of your own reproductive anatomy. So whether it's the cyclical change of your hormones or the fact that, you might need to have a child or want to have a child. And I always say we built this company with babies in our bellies and babies on our boobs, because since we've incorporated, I've had 2 babies. I've had no maternity leave. I've just kept going. That's it. Probably another regret I have, but it's really hard. And so you have to work through not only the fact that you're 2 rungs down on the expectation levels of society, but you also have to work through the fact that your body is going through some fundamentally seismic changes that will impact your brain, your physical well-being, everything to do with it. And I think having worked to 9 months, all the way to the end of kind of 9 months of pregnancies and then basically bounced straight back into it, it's tough for women. It's tough, especially if you want to have a family at the same time. I've managed to sort of just build it into the business. Like I say, I brought them with me places. I strapped them to the front of me if I needed to go to events. And I think that having COVID made it a lot easier, but I would tilt the camera, tilt the video so that I was like breastfeeding on a call secretly, and then trying to juggle things like this. And I think that one thing I would say, and as a word of encouragement, is actually you can still do it. I've never felt more resilient in my life. And I think that if you can do it whilst incubating a human being, you can do absolutely anything. And my to-do before I'm due list, I called it, you have never been ever as focused in terms of trying to get things done than when you know you have a deadline of 9 months. And I think that I managed to work into such a high level of productivity that I think people can achieve it. There was someone who I met recently who said, oh, I should wait until after I've had a child. And I was like, no, you shouldn't. You should do it now, because firstly, you've got that focus time of 9 months. And secondly, they sleep a lot when they're born.
That's true.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I do think that it should be something that women aren't discouraged because they have a biological clock in terms of trying to set up their own thing, but just also know that shit is hard.
Yeah, very fair. Thank you for sharing your experience, Deirdre. I wanted to go on and talk a bit more about your team and culture, because you've built a really strong team, and you have, obviously co-founders, and I know the team is predominantly female. So that diversity, I always find that makes the best teams. Can you share a bit more about how you've approached hiring over the years, what you look for when you assess talent? Because I'd imagine there are going to be people listening to this saying, I really want to work for a company like Hertility.
We've had actually in the space of a year, we've had over 33,000 people apply to work at Hertility, which is mind-blowing. And it just will tell you the shift of employee expectations now. People want to work for something with purpose, and they want meaning in their work. They don't just want a sort of 9 to 5. They want to know that they're impacting the world in some way, whether it's sort of through their recycling outcomes or it's either planet or people. My approach to hiring people has really changed. I think that to begin with, you can't help but have a certain sense of naivety. You never know what to expect. I'm also quite old school in sort of like the academics being very important, and someone's sort of level of respect, what they wear, everything is important to me. I think that there's a new wave of hoodies up and slouching back, and that, to be honest, to me isn't something that you should bring to an interview. I think that my change in terms of how I interview people and what I look for, you have to have worked at a startup, because you just do not get it if you have not worked at a startup. And I think some of the times that where people have gone, they're like, it's chaotic and it's so fast paced. And I'm like, if you want a steamship, get on a steamship. It's big and it's fancy and it's comfy. We're a motherfucking speedboat. And if you want to get on, get wet and get fast, that's how we're going to go, because the environment we're in, it is sink or be drowned, and you have to move fast, and you have to be agile, and you have to be on the pulse of absolutely everything. And if you want a slower pulse, you get on the steamship. And I think I used to try and maybe sugarcoat it a little bit for people, and now I don't. Now I'm like, yes, we are high fives and butt slaps all the way, but we're also, you have to work hard and show up.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's so much better to be honest about what you are as a business, because there is no point selling one vision or not being transparent about the reality of life, because this is where people end up joining and it being the wrong fit. And I think it's so much better to be upfront about these things. And what you said is completely rings true. I mean, I've been headhunting for far too long in startups, and one of the biggest mistakes is we have so many people from banking, consulting and law and private equity that want to move into startups, and the vast majority of those people are not right for it. they like the idea of it. And it's not to say that one day they might not be, but the reality is so different. And so even if the people that have made that change successfully are the ones that have angel invested, have gone and advised, have done pro bono work for their friends' startups. They've made conscious shifts to go get entrepreneurial experience. They've set up a side hustle. They've kind of built something on their own. And I think that's where I'm like, okay, you're going outside of the norm, and you're really showing me that you're ready for that switch. But most people won't do that. So I think it's really important. But when you get it right, my goodness, it is people and talent has an exponential impact on the success of their startup, and it's just so important. And on that note, I'd love to hear how you would describe the culture at Hertility. You've already given us alluded to the pace and the dynamism of it, but is there anything else that any other ways you'd articulate it?
I feel very fortunate to have a team of people who are incredibly smart, incredibly dedicated, dynamic and agile. I think that there is a real reverberation of just like, we're in this together. It's like this passion that we have. We've particularly had it with, the last couple of months where we're really trying to nail down our targets for year end, and everyone is just like, get shit done. And that to me is like, I've already alluded to the fact that I'm the chief ball breaker, but like when I see the people just knuckling down and getting shit done, that to me is the most exciting thing. But our team is amazing. I think we've such a warmth to the team when we get together for team days. There's this real sense of purpose, and I think you always will hire wrong candidates at the right time and the wrong time, and
of course
there's always people for whom this isn't the right fit because of that pace, because of the expectation, because also we set this standard that we can't breach. Whether it's regulations or legals or healthcare or the standard of care, we have a much higher standard of care we need to achieve because we're dealing with people's lives and health and diagnostics and clinical care. And so if you can't meet that, you can't fit. And sometimes that's tough for people, but we have to maintain that standard in our people as well as our practices. And if they don't marry up, then, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I think we have a great culture. I think we have a great team.
It certainly sounds like it, and I can really relate and agree with the point around talent. The best talent these days want to work for a purpose-driven company. They want to have an impact. They want the hard problems. They want to be a part of solving the big societal challenges. And I think it's an amazing time for companies that have a really strong mission, because I think you will end up getting the best of the best, and then amazing things can happen. So thank you so much for sharing that. Before we sadly get to our final 3 wrap-up questions, we've heard a lot about the story of Hertility, and I guess we also want to look forward about all the amazing things you have in the future. So do you mind sharing a bit about what you have planned for 2024 and beyond?
Very excitingly, we are launching our app this summer. One of the things that has been a real focus for us is that we want to be, and we are pioneering, a world where women track their reproductive health. To me, it's a no-brainer. It makes so much sense for people there's a lot of talk about egg freezing, and yes, that provides reproductive autonomy, but there's also, for me, the first step should be for someone to track their rate of egg reserve decline, for someone to track and monitor their reproductive health, whether it's their cycles, their hormones, everything to do with that. I think that is the world we're aiming towards, and that's how we will facilitate it, is by having the app that we're launching, and that's sort of the iterative process of building that app so that it will be something that people can track periods, ovulation, pregnancy, everything to do with your entire reproductive lifespan. And that's the most exciting thing. We're also doing some exciting collaborations. So we've just launched with Cult Beauty. Actually, there's a co-branded makeup bag, and we're launching with Sweaty Betty to do a femtech range. So there'll be menstrual leggings and maternity wear and menopause tops. So that's also really, really exciting. So there's a whole breadth of things that we're plotting and planning for the year, but they're varied but exciting.
Yeah. It sounds it. Best of luck with all that. That sounds like an amazing time for the business. Good luck with it all. We sadly are at an end. The 3 final questions. We'll start with, this is 40 Minute Mentor. So I have to ask, if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I really struggle with this question. I feel like I'm very well mentored by my parents, both in very distinct and separate ways, but amazing ways. They're like my They're my sages, and they give such incredible advice. I don't look to anyone else really externally as being someone who I would admire as being a mentor. I'm very lucky and blessed to have such incredibly intelligent parents who've given me so much advice over the last few years that they are it. And I'm fortunate they're alive.
I love that. You don't need anyone else. No, that's amazing. That's so great to hear. Penultimate question is always a question roulette, where we've let some of our loyal listeners know that you're coming on, and they've sent us some questions. So can you pick 1, 2, or 3, and we'll see what mystery question you've got.
3.
You are a co-founder with your twin sister. How do you navigate disagreements or conflicts in your roles?
We have an unbelievably complementary skill set. So she's science, I'm compliance. She's research, I'm regulations. And we actually never agree on the same thing in terms of like branding or styling. It's hilarious. We always have opposite opinions. That honestly, if there is a decision that needs to be made, Natalie is the mediator. She's always she gets the sort of swinging vote. But we never really have conflict, which is amazing. But if we do, Natalie's the arbitrator.
Okay, nice. That's a perfect way of sorting it out. I love that. And finally, Deirdre, what is the final piece of career advice that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
I think you have to, if you're embarking on or thinking about embarking on entrepreneurship, you have to recognize that it isn't a side hustle. It is front, center, side, back. It is 360. It's everything to do with your life. So you don't do something lightheartedly or half-assed. It's all ass. Before you even start, know that it will consume every facet of your life. So you have to be down for that.
Yeah, brilliant advice, important advice, very pragmatic and honest. And that sums up the conversation we've had. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Deirdre. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure. Love your mission. I think it's amazing. And I really hope our listeners will really become massive advocates, whether it's applying to work with you, becoming customers, spreading the word. But you deserve every success. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are 2 simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.